I think it's like a quote from like Frozen 2, and like I don't know any of the characters. Like one of the guys is like, just do the next right thing. Like you don't need just do the next right thing if you're not sure like what's ahead. And I think that's a good way to live life.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever Girl Collective podcast. My name is Lyndsey.
I'm Emily.
And today we'll be talking about women in ministry. But to get started, Emily, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I will first say I am super honored to be on the Girl Collective podcast.
The first one ever.
The first one ever. So I'm really excited, and I think it's an awesome vision that you have, Lyndsey, and I'm proud of you for what you're doing. It's really exciting. So Lyndsey and I met when we were in a residency together at Grace Church in Overland Park. And I was in a residency with my husband to start a church while Lyndsey was in a residency for children's ministry. So we quickly became friends, and unfortunately we had to leave and start a church. So my husband and I left, and the unfortunate part is our relationship, it's continued, but it was hard being long distance, isn't it?
It is.
But we're still great friends. So here I am in Kansas City visiting, and what better opportunity to film a podcast. So here we are.
Here we are. How did you get started in ministry?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. And I don't, it's an interesting question because I guess you have to define what exactly ministry looks like. But I think my first real exposure or experience in leading people or talking to people about faith started when I was in college. And I went to a college that didn't really encourage my spiritual growth. So I knew I needed to find a place to do that. And so I found a church that I could attend a college group at. And I ended up volunteering in their kids ministry, actually. So I served there, and I learned that I didn't know anything about the Bible or faith or anything. So that was my first experience really learning Bible stories and learning how to teach people about it. And it was the best first experience because it was with kids. So you're talking about faith on a really easy to understand level. So that was my first experience. And then I also led a Bible study at my college campus. So like I said, they didn't really have any faith-based programs or groups. And I knew I needed that. I needed a community, and I needed a place where I could grow and with other people who believed things the same as me. So I started a Bible study, which was kind of frowned upon because they, the school wasn't really open to that. And so it's kind of neat. It's still actually meets till this day at that college. It's 12 years later, 15
amazing.
Years later.
The Bible study you started.
Yeah. Last I heard,
so
they
cool.
continue meeting. It was kind of loosely affiliated with Campus Crusades for Christ, but they weren't welcomed on that campus. So it was kind of I'd meet with them, and they'd encourage me about what to go do on my own at the campus. So
that is so cool.
Anyway, those were my first experience, I think, with ministry.
Did you have a woman in your life or women who helped pave a way for you that you're oh, I see this female ministry leader, I'd like to be like that? Or do you feel it was just a calling in your life? All right, yeah, I'm going to do this.
I think at different stages of my life, it looked different. So my first youth group that I attended was led by, there was a couple of female leaders there, but they were old ladies. It was this older couple in the church. She must have been in her 50s at the time or 60s. For me as a teenager, didn't necessarily feel like somebody I could be myself around or anything. But I did think man, it would be cool to be like her when I'm older, it would be cool to be somebody who gets to do this when I'm older. So it was kind of inspiring. But I think it was actually in college, my Campus Crusades leaders, they really made me feel empowered or my voice mattered. And then I met somebody through church who had a ministry of her own where she just loved on and cared for missionaries. And she asked really great questions. She's just the kind of person that would ask a really good question. And all of a sudden everyone's in deep conversation and bearing their souls to one another. And that's when I think she was the one who really was that relationship was a catalyst for me to help me be effective in like leading people and connecting with people and community. So
that is so sweet. I think one of the best parts about ministry that like you're best at is vulnerability welcomes vulnerability. And you're so great at being vulnerable and creating that safe space. And I think it's why we grew so close and you helped me through one of the toughest times. What advice do you have for women who want to go into ministry or that are in ministry to help them become stronger leaders or just be able to relate better to their members?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think something that I often like even have to remind myself is like, you don't need anybody's permission. Like you don't need to like wait around for like anybody to give you like a title or a position to like be effective in ministry or in like, you know, making an impact in people's lives. Like you can do that all on your own, right where you are. Like, and the best thing that you can be is yourself. Like God has positioned each of us uniquely to be in the circles we're in and to be around the people we're around. So like to be looking for something more is to not be like where you are presently. So I think women in your 20s, no matter where you are, like to be actually engaging with the community around you and not always like with your eyes to like what's ahead. I think that there's a healthy balance of that, like having, you know, goals for yourself and a vision for the future. But I don't know, I think it could be easy to miss it. I know I did that. I moved quickly through my 20s, like hoping for the next thing, like looking for what's next. And I probably around like 25 or 26 decided to just slow down and like enjoy the youth as it was there, you know, like it's going to be, it goes fast. And then all of a sudden you're not in your 20s anymore. And you're like, what the heck happened? So yeah, just like leaning into the opportunities around you. I guess I think about, my husband and I worked on cruise ships for 5 years. And it felt like just like there was no spiritual environment at all. It didn't, you know, and we were wanting to like start a Bible study and like find other Christians. Like that was a really big like thing we'd think about, like, oh, we're so lonely, there's no other Christians. But like when we had that mindset, we weren't seeing all of these people around us that were all created in the image of God. Like, who cares if they're not Christians? They're people that God has put us in their lives. Like, we need to spend the time and invest and see them. And now when we look back, we like learned so much from those relationships with people. When we just slowed down and like looked at them as people and like leaned into it. So
that's so good. I remember before I was a resident, I was in politics. And that was like when we first met, right before I entered the residency program, but not feeling qualified at all. And you just reminding me, like, you don't need a title, like you don't need permission. Like Jesus created you for this. So like step into it. And it was so encouraging.
I think it's like a quote from like Frozen 2. And like, I don't know any of the characters. Like one of the guys is like, just do the next right thing. Like, you don't need the, like, you know, just do the next right thing if you're not sure like what's ahead. And I think that's a good way to live life. Like looking like, hey, what's the next right thing right now? Not like 10 years from now or whatever, but
that is so good. Yeah. Obviously being a woman in leadership, whether that's in ministry or just in like the secular world, is challenging. What are some challenges that you have faced as a woman in leadership?
Yeah. So be in church planting, you know, and specifically like pastoral leadership. I think the biggest challenge for me is like being the only woman in the room. Like I have to like hype myself up when I know I'm going into an environment where I'm going to be the only woman in the room. And like, I will have two narratives in my mind. One of them being, I don't belong here. Like, or, you know, I'm telling myself like, you shouldn't be going to this. Like, this is for men and you don't belong. Like, don't go, like, just stay home or whatever. Like, it's not for you. But then the other narrative is if I'm not there, there's no woman in the room. So like, I have to go and be the only woman in the room. Like, so I think that constant like narrative and that constant like wanting to do the right thing. But like, yeah, so I think that's the trickiest thing. And there's even, I have a friend who I occasionally will text and be like, hey, I am on my way to one of those meetings where I'm the only woman in the room. Like, will you pray for me? So that's tricky. And I don't, it's challenging because I care too much what people think. That's why it's challenging. Like I need to grow like out of that. But I think I'm like so concerned that everyone thinks that I'm fighting for a position in that room. Not that I'm just like there, like leaning in again, like leaning into like where God's put me. Like I just have this like, I guess, struggle with like wondering what everyone's thinking, or if they're telling themselves I don't belong there, you know, if they're saying that. So yeah, I think that's the biggest struggle. And that's like a personal issue. Like I need to grow out of that, like caring what people think. But I think that'll be something I am always dealing with in just my role. So
yeah, it's so easy.
Definitely challenging.
I think you pointed out a key part in that of something that I do too. Of like when you're walking into like a difficult situation, or if you're just like, I don't know what to do, but like texting, like, and having community that you can walk alongside with, so you know you're not alone, is so important.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have a solid community?
Yeah, like I do. I think like we have people in our life and in our circles who don't think that women should be, in leadership or in ministry, and that's fine. And we like love those relationships and love those perspectives, but we also have done a really good job seeking out people who do have the same view as us. And there's another pastor's wife, co-pastor kind of situation on Long Island where our church is. And we text each other now and again and just encourage each other. Or like, if I'm going to another like pastor's meeting, I'll be like, are you going to be there? Like, cause we can look at each other. I'm not the only woman in the room anymore when she's there, so that's kind of nice. Like, and I do feel like I have enough community around me that like understands my role and can like see, like where God's working like in and through me, that they, even if they have different views, like they can still support and encourage me and encourage like what we're doing to empower women at our church. So yeah,
that is amazing. It's really cool to see you paving the way in Long Island to like, whether you see it or not, like you're planting seeds for your little girls or like other women to be inspired to step into who God created them to be.
Yeah, it was kind of, a couple of weeks ago, actually I spoke at church, and I think besides my husband, everybody on stage that day was female. Our whole band was women. It was like, it just felt like we were making a statement. We're not. Like, I think the thing is to just be, again, like be who we are and like just see who God brings along. But that day, it was all women on stage. Like, this is probably rare, huh?
Yeah, definitely rare.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just like jump into the Bible. Like I know that this is something that you've had a passion for and you've studied, but what are some verses that you go to or things that you've just reflected on? Like, how did Jesus use women in the Bible and like how Jesus views women?
Yeah. Well, there's many, you can like find a lot of examples in scripture. I think the one that one that I remember a lot, or I think about a lot, is the resurrection of Jesus, like where it all began, right? Like if there's no resurrection, then everything we're doing is in vain, right? So, and if you look right back to the resurrection, the first person who was there was a woman, right? So Mary's there and Jesus appears to her and empowers her to go and to tell everybody about him. So the first person preaching the gospel and sharing about the resurrection of Jesus is a woman. So, that definitely empowers me and reminds me that like I have good news to share about Jesus, just the same way that Mary did in John 20. I get to go and I get to share as well. And Jesus hasn't disqualified me from that because I'm a woman. Like I shouldn't let that be something that gets in the way, because Mary was qualified too. So yeah, there's that. And then also, it's Romans 16, there's a list of just apostles that would be like co-workers of Paul's. And in that list, one of the women included in there is Junia, who is a woman, included like of a co-worker of Paul's. And for me to think like I get to be a co-worker of Paul too. Like I'm just as qualified. Pentecost, the Holy Spirit coming and empowering people and, filling people with the Spirit to be able to go and do ministry. It wasn't just men there getting filled with the Spirit and getting equipped to do ministry. There's women there too. So I do have to remind myself of those things and look for it when I'm reading scripture, like look for where were the women in the room? Like, and Jesus' apostles, like his followers, like there were women following him and in close community with him. And he welcomed them. He asked them to come and follow him and be part of what he was doing in his earthly ministry. And I think, why would that change? Like when he's not here on earth, and I think that's what helps me. Like in those moments when I'm the only woman in the room, I think, so was Mary, So definitely those parts of scripture and those stories are rich for me, for sure.
That is awesome. I remember before I was in full-time ministry, I would get so caught up in having to be in full-time ministry. Like I was not a minister, or like I wasn't doing ministry if it was not full-time, which is not true at all. And I don't know if you've ever heard like someone wrestle with that as well. Yeah. But what are some ways that like women are able to just like be in ministry without it being full-time?
So I was a teacher. I taught high school full time. For 3 years. When we finished cruise ships, we spent 3 years, well, actually 5 years in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri. And for 3 of those years, I taught high school. And I don't know, I guess for me, I never thought about like needing to be in full-time ministry. It just wasn't like even a second thought. And I think part of the reason why is because I looked at my students as people I could talk to about Jesus. And I got creative about it. Like I would think about like, okay, if somebody comes to me and talks to me about something like a difficult situation they're going through at home, how can I share Jesus with them in that moment? In a way that kind of fits, like it's school, you can't always be like just quoting scripture at school. So like, I don't know, it was just fun for me to think about how I could be bringing Jesus and bringing God into the things that I was doing naturally. I'm now in full-time ministry, and I see that people who are working in like a secular or like a normal, let's say, like job, they have far more influence than I'll ever have. Like,
yes,
way
100%.
more influence. Like they're encountering all kinds of people who need to know about the hope of Jesus, and just that need to know about a different way of doing life, that need community, that are lonely. Like, I don't get that. I go to work and it's just like me and my husband, we have one employee, and the 3 of us are sitting, like, we don't get to do that. Like I have to go out of my way to do it. I think like even the bigger challenge is, how do you be in full-time ministry and still actually be ministering to people? Like I think that's even more of a challenge than how do you minister to people when you're working full-time.
Yes, I agree. When I was in politics before I went into a full-time ministry, I completely underestimated every opportunity I had. Like, I felt
you realize once you get here, right?
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness, I knew so many people who were not believers. Like I knew so many people I could easily just like invite to church. And the most time that I spent with people, or like time I spent around people, most of that time they were non-believers, and there's so many opportunities. And I think like leading a Bible study, or like being in a, like just even like being in a Bible study, like those are such good opportunities. Like you don't have to be leading in order to like help Jesus change hearts. Like he doesn't ask you to be full-time. Like he just asks you to be willing. And that is something that I wish that I would have been more focused on, besides like, oh my goodness.
Right. It's true. I think too, like if I could go back to those 3 years of teaching, so I was still very involved at my church, and I probably looked at that as my ministry. Like if I could go back, I probably looked at, like, I was a youth leader, so I'd look at that as being like, that's my ministry and teaching is my job. But if I could go back, I think I would have thought of my job more as a ministry, and I probably would have listened more to my coworkers instead of thinking about the youth event that was happening that night. And I would have leaned in to just be, again, like showing love and showing just like, that had something different, that something different was happening, and they could have that too. But yeah, that is so good. For the women or girls, whoever is listening, that may not be in full-time ministry but may feel called, how would you recommend they like figure out that calling or wrestle with it, or like even like if they're like, this is my future, like what resources would you recommend they use, or like start to be built up to like affirm and like be ready to like step into that? Oh, good question. Well, I know for us, thinking about church planting in particular, there was a book we read called Am I Called? There's that. And we also asked people in our life. So we reached out to many people in our life and said, like, hey, could you see us starting and pastoring a church? Like, and they wrote out their answer to that question and shared it with us. And now even when we're discouraged and think like, what in the world have we done? We can look back and read that and say like, oh, they saw that in me. Like they saw that in us. Like we do have what it takes. Like the people in our life have encouraged this. So definitely like leaning into the wisdom of people, but, and like not being afraid to take a risk. Like I can't tell you how many people have told me they want to be in full-time ministry, but take no effort to get there. Like it's going to take a risk. It's going to take sacrifice, and like being okay with being uncomfortable for the sake of maybe just a dream you have. Like don't overthink it. Like when I wanted to go to college, I found a college, I applied, I went, like not to think of it as anything more maybe than what it is. Like if you want a job at a church, find a job at a church, like, and not be afraid of what that might require of you, because it's like, don't overthink it or overcomplicate something that you want. Like, it's not normal to want to be in full-time ministry. Yeah. So the fact that you want it should be enough for you to pursue it. So.
Yeah. That is so good. Taking a risk. It is a risk. Like, ministry is not just a job. Like, you're walking and talking it out. And I don't feel like God calls us to do like non-scary things. Like,
what's that? Like, there's like a quote, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the calls. There you go. Or equips the, no, that isn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Yeah. That's the way it goes, right? I don't know.
That sounds right.
Maybe that'll help somebody.
I never understood that until I went into full-time ministry.
Right.
I
have nothing to
I didn't have ministry experience until the residency program, and Grace Church poured into me so much, and I'm so thankful. But I remember the first few months like being like, oh my gosh, goodness, like, God, are you sure you called me? Because I'm actually not sure. You know that I have never been in kids ministry before. Like,
right.
I am also sitting here learning a lot with these kids too. Right. But like,
and that was like the best attitude for you to have. Like, you weren't vying for like a position or like trying to like, I don't know, just be like this ultimate kids person. Like, you used the gifts you had and like relied on God and like the team around you to like build you into the leader that God wanted you to be. So
it is so sweet.
Yeah.
Also, if anyone is wondering how they can dig deeper in knowing the Bible better, serving in kids ministry.
Number one way.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I wasn't raised in the church. You weren't either.
Yeah,
so
I wasn't
both
either.
Like not being raised in church. Like people will talk about, I remember being in college and people were talking about like, I don't know, Adam and Eve. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know anything about the Bible. All I knew was about Jesus. Like, died for my sins. That was it. I didn't really, all the Old Testament stories, I felt so silly. Or the songs, they'd sing like some song, Father Abraham song. I literally still don't even know how it goes. And that I always felt like that made me feel like I was unqualified. Like the fact that I didn't know anything, but all of that stuff develops, as you're saying, like through just the work you get to do. So
that is so cool. Kind of going back to mentoring, you've mentored me and how you've like just helped me so much in difficult times of my life.
You've mentored me too. So that's discipleship, right? It's back. Yeah.
How do you recommend someone like forming that relationship with other women? Because I know women out there crave it. Like I crave it. Like I crave community, and I know I'm not the only one. It is a burden I think all women share to like live in godly community that is building you up, not tearing you down. And you're like one of the best like models for like building friendships and just like connecting with people and making them feel so well loved. Like how do people do that? Yeah. What do you do?
Well, it's really easy for me because I'm an extrovert. So I don't have as hard of a time. I will say that. But I know there's extroverts that struggle with this too. But I think like not being afraid to initiate. I feel like we can sometimes be like so scared of like being awkward or being like, it would be weird to invite this stranger out for coffee. But like remembering that everyone is looking for friends. There's nobody I haven't yet to meet someone who's like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need any more friends. Like, or I don't need a coffee date. Like everybody wants this. So like being brave, like taking the first step and inviting somebody out to coffee, like being the initiator. I feel like I'm always the initiator. I'm the one texting the plans. And sometimes it can get frustrating. And I think to myself, like nobody actually wants to hang out with me. Like I'll tell myself like, if I text nobody this weekend, I will get no texts from anybody this weekend and I will be doing nothing. And that bothers me. But the truth is like God gifted me for that initiating and I should be the initiator because I'm the person who God has given that to. Like, why do I get upset about that? So there's that, like just taking the risk, going first. But then also like, you don't need like a ton of, you can have 2 or 3 super close friends and that's okay. I think sometimes like social media too can make it look like everyone's got these big circles and everybody's got like 20 friends on a weekend going out and doing all the fun things. But truthfully, 2 or 3 friends is like enough. And like in reality, you don't have the capacity. Like you really don't. And if you look at the way Jesus lived his life, he had his like, larger community around him, or like, let's say his village, you know, and then he had his circle of 12, but then he had his intimate 2 or 3 that were his closest disciples, his like best friends, as we would call them. So looking at that, like, I mean, don't overthink like it, like find 1 or 2 people. Like you said, being vulnerable too, like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm too vulnerable, but like just putting the weird stuff out there, like just tell the weird stuff. Like just, again, not being afraid of what people are going to think about you or whatever. If it's a terrible time, you go to coffee and you say something weird and it's a terrible time, you don't have to go to coffee with them again. At least you try. Like, call someone else.
I remember you reaching out to me, asking me to grab coffee. And I was like, oh, you want to hang out with me?
Right. And it probably was stressful to me to text you that. Like, it is stressful. It's not like an easy thing, but yeah.
And then I ended up being at your place 3 to 4 times a week, which is
great. Yes. I just love I envision a world where that's normal. Like we just, friends are at each other's house and we do life together and we do it in community. And, you know, whether you have kids or you're married or you're single or you're whatever your situation is, you would just do life with other people and it's natural. You're going grocery shopping, you'd call someone to go with you, or, you know, you're folding laundry, you'd invite someone to come help. But we're just like so careful to not let people see maybe those sides of us, or not to, I don't know, include people in those mundane things. But I think it's the mundane things that actually create a depth in a relationship. So
I agree. That is so good. Yeah. One last question before we close up the podcast. Okay. What is the best piece of advice that you received or that you would give to someone in their 20s?
Oh, man. Well, I didn't listen to anyone's advice in my 20s. So I can't even remember. I would not have listened to anyone's advice in my 20s, I don't think. But I definitely, something I wish maybe I would have listened to was like the slow down thing. Like just slowing down and taking things in, not rushing, not rushing to be like is so established or whatever it is. Like I was just talking to someone who's in college a couple weeks ago, and she's like, I'm thinking about maybe becoming a teacher, which would be like a career change for her. And she's like, but I'm so worried because I want to be financially independent and have a house and what all of this, like after I graduate. And I'm thinking like, you're 18 years old. Like, it's okay. Like you can slow down. You can like figure out things out slower. Like not to always be like racing against like what culture like says our lives should look like at a certain age or whatever, but like slowing down and take it in. Gosh, I wish I had like a best advice I was given, but I have a bad memory too. I see faces in my like as I'm thinking about this question, I can see people's faces in my mind that were pivotal, that did say like things that really were, you know, valuable to me. But yeah, I think like don't rush through the things that God like wants these things for you and like wants things in these experiences for your life. And if you are just racing through everything, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss what like actually is there for you. Journal. Maybe I would add that. Yes. I say this, but I'm so terrible at using my own journal. My husband journals for us both. Let's just put it that way. So we have these things called 5-year journals. Actually, you have one, right?
It's such a fun gift. Yes, I love it.
It's a really fun gift. There's a company called Lyndsey that makes a 5-year journal, and you have a page for every like day of the year. So in 5 years time, you'd be able to look back and see what's happened over the last 5 years, like on that page, like all there in a couple sentences per year, let's say. That is an incredible tool to be able to see like things have happened in my life. I'm not hopeless. I'm not lost. I'm not stuck. Like, we could actually see the truth of like all of the things that have unfolded. We find great encouragement in that. Again, I'm terrible at doing it myself, but I love when Mike's like, hey, listen to what happened this day last year. And we find so much encouragement and like, inspiration really from that to see what could be accomplished in such a short time, but also like keeping track of the milestone, like cool things, like your 20s are really pivotal. Like a lot of things happen. Yeah. So much. Every year of your 20s looks so different. Yes. It is crazy. It totally does. So yeah, I got married when I was 21. So that's probably why I don't have a lot. But like we did cool things. Like we worked on a cruise ship. Like that was so different and cool. And it was fun. And I think if I were trapped in like I don't know, society's like expectations of me, I would have graduated college and like tried to find a teaching job immediately. And I would have missed out on like all of the fun we got to have because we decided to just be a little different. you know? And we took risks. Like my brother-in-law moved in with us when we were 26. So that was also my 20s were like raising a teenager. But it was fun. Again, we took a risk. We said, well, actually, this was good advice. Someone said was like, well, think about if you don't take him and like what could happen? Like, what, you know, like kind of like evaluating, like, what if you don't do this? And that helped us make that decision. So yeah.
That is so good.
Anyway.
You're not on a timeline and take risks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
Right.
If only I could remember that all the time too. Well, thank you so much for joining today, Emily.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. So yeah.
Well, we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Girl Collective podcast. To stay up to date on what's happening, visit joingirlcollective.com or follow us on Instagram at joingirlcollective.